Hi everyone, Dr. Luqman here, welcoming you back to our YouTube channel, and today we'll be discussing another cat topic with you guys. Now, in today's topic, we're going to be talking about something very interesting, which is the possibility of cats having ADHD, which is actually a human disorder. Now, before we get into the nitty-gritty of all of this is your friendly reminder to please hit that subscribe button, do leave us a like, and of course, we welcome comments as well. So without further delay, let's try to get into it. Now, ADHD is known as attention deficit or hyperactivity disorder. And this is a developmental disorder that is usually diagnosed in children, males more often than females, but sometimes it is diagnosed in adults as well. Now, it is one of the most common mental disorders around the world, and is also one that is frequently perhaps not diagnosed, or in some instances, it is misdiagnosed. And there is no real way to describe someone with ADHD because the symptoms and signs vary from individual to individual. Generally speaking, though, children with ADHD may have a very difficult time concentrating in school, and this is where they usually get a diagnosis from a specialist. However, there are also instances where children are fine in school, but they seem to struggle in other social situations, or they seem to have this impulsivity or this hyperdrive about them where they cannot stay still in situations where they are supposed to remain still. And of course, it is important to remember that adults too can be diagnosed with ADHD. However, please keep in mind that ADHD is not something you can develop as an adult. So it's something that you are born with. You might have missed a diagnosis in childhood, and you can be diagnosed as an adult to have ADHD. But the inclusion criteria and diagnosis process is very different for adults when compared to children. Now, children will usually see a child specialist, and a child specialist will determine whether or not they have ADHD based on interviewing their parents, their teachers, and looking at, the primary complaint as to why the child was brought in to them in the first place. Whereas for adults, it usually manifests in other ways, and their inclusion criteria usually involve a visit to a medical doctor who might refer them to a psychologist or a psychiatrist, who in turn might refer them to someone who can diagnose them for ADHD. This usually involves a series of tests and interviews, and also probably involves some tests and interviews that are designed to determine whether the person does in fact have ADHD, or if they are thinking that they have ADHD but are over-exaggerating or lying about their symptoms. Now, suffice it to say that, as you all may have known by now, I am not a medical doctor. So please keep in mind that the information I just provided you is a general outline of this disorder. If you think you have ADHD, or if you think your child has ADHD, my advice would be to not use my explanation as, an inclusion criteria to diagnose yourself, but rather to see a medical doctor, a psychologist, or a psychiatrist, depending on the age of the individual. So if it's your child, please see a child specialist. And if you think you have ADHD, please go see your doctor. And remember that what I just described is a general description of the disease and not a diagnosis of the disease. Now, with that in mind, it is important to recognize that, unfortunately, these days, ADHD has been somewhat glamorized in social media. And many people tend to put up generic posts or generic advice that leads many people to believe that they have ADHD. In my opinion, this is quite dangerous because you're relying on a complete stranger without any credentials to diagnose you. At the same time, if you do believe you have a disorder and you think that you need medication, but you do not discuss your conditions with a doctor, you might be doing more harm for yourself or your child than good. So this is sort of the unfortunate, downside of social media, where many people tend to rely on strangers for medical advice, which is, always dangerous. And it is important to keep in mind that all of us are individuals, and there is no way that a stranger on the internet would know, what you are going through and what conditions you may or may not have. Even more important is recognizing that ADHD itself is an umbrella term, and someone who has ADHD may not necessarily have all the signs of ADHD. And therefore, it is impossible to say that you have ADHD or your child has ADHD or not based on someone else's opinion on the internet. In addition, it is very important to recognize and remember that ADHD itself has different levels. So people who have milder forms of ADHD may not even need medication at all and might do, just fine with some adjustments to their routine, whereas there are people who genuinely do need medication, and this medication is usually long-term. And you have to keep in mind that ADHD is not a disease, so the medication is not going to cure or fix the ailment, but it is rather a disorder, and the medication helps these people function normally. Furthermore, it is very important to recognize that just because someone has ADHD doesn't mean that they are not able to function normally. On the contrary, many people with ADHD are actually high achievers. So if you do have ADHD or if your child does have ADHD, do not be surprised if you find them or yourselves excelling in academia and, being generally fine and still having, a diagnosis. That is also very much normal. Just because you or your child get a diagnosis doesn't mean that they are, somehow handicapped for life. Now, this brings us to a very interesting topic where a lot of people tend to think that their pet cats actually have ADHD and tend to say that, is it possible for cats to have ADHD? And then they go off and describe signs that they think that cats might have ADHD based purely on the fact that cats are behaving in a way that they suspect a human with ADHD would behave. First of all, in veterinary literature, there is no documented case of cats having ADHD, and there is no diagnosis criteria to, diagnose a cat as having ADHD. Veterinary neurology is a field that does explore neurological disorders in pets, and they have not listed ADHD as a possible diagnosis for cats. This means that no matter how your cat is acting, it is not possible for them to have ADHD because ADHD is not a condition recognized in cats. This is very important because many people, unfortunately, tend to assume their cat has an issue or a problem, when in fact their cat is acting like a cat. They seem to complain that their cat seems to be very intently focused when they're trying to catch a toy or their favorite, scratching post or their favorite person. And they think that this is a sign of hyperactivity or hyperdrive that, individuals with ADHD may show. However, it is very important to recognize differences in species, and a cat that is, for example, showing a really high interest in an object, a person, or a toy and is about to pounce is just being a cat. They are not displaying signs of a mental disorder. Likewise, if your cat gets easily distracted, this is because cats are primarily territorial and this instinct stays with them. So the minute something seems new or foreign in their territory, be it a sound, a sight, an object, or a person, it is very natural for your cat to get distracted. This means your cat is normal and healthy and aware of their surroundings. It does not mean that your cat is unwell. It does not mean that your cat has a disorder. It does not mean that your cat needs medication. It just means that your cat is, just being a cat. This is very important because we do see instances where people like to assume that their pets have a disorder and then they go off into blaming everything their pets do on said disorder. However, it is important to remember that because cats cannot have ADHD, any signs of your cat not acting normally should not be attributed to a condition, and instead they should be checked out by a veterinarian. For example, many people say that their cat is not paying attention because their cat has ADHD and therefore has missed the litter box and has an accident outside the litter box. This is very dangerous because there are many reasons a cat may miss their litter box, but ADHD is not one of these reasons. That is just not possible. Likewise, there are people who say that their cat endlessly presses their head against a wall and is hyper-focused or meditating, and they assume that this is a sign of ADHD. And it is not, because head pressing in animals against an object is a sign of a neurological issue. Similarly, many people tend to say that their cat seems to circle endlessly for hours, sometimes without purpose, in one direction, either clockwise or counterclockwise. And they think that the cats are getting distracted by their own tail, and they find it humorous, when again, this is a sign of an underlying neurological problem. So the key takeaway message here is that just because a condition has been recognized in humans, and it is unfortunately overly glamorized on social media, and people like to, diagnose themselves or assume that they have a condition, it is not possible for this to transfer over to your cat. So anytime you feel like your cat is acting out of the ordinary, it's one of two things. Either your cat is just normal and you are assuming that they are not normal, or your cat has a neurological problem, but your cat needs veterinary attention. So in either scenario, it is wrong to assume that your cat has ADHD. And in both scenarios, again, it is important that if you do feel like this is something that could be of concern, you should see your veterinarian for more information and an actual diagnosis. Again, please keep in mind that the information provided about ADHD in today's video is based on my research. It is not to be used for diagnosing yourself with ADHD. I just went over a brief overview of the disorder itself. And the information I presented for humans is actually available online on most human health websites. And once again, please do keep in mind that the information should not be used for diagnosing yourself or your child. Again, also please remember that it is not possible for your cats to have ADHD. As explained, this is not a condition recognized in cats. And if you do think that your cat does have a neurological problem, you should see your veterinarian instead of trying to diagnose them yourself. Above all, please remember that even though some ADHD medications are available over the counter in some countries, you should never ever offer these to your cat. You should never try to force feed them to your cat, and you should never self-medicate your cat in the first place. So that's it for today's videos, guys. Thank you again for tuning in to our channel. As always, this is me, Dr. Luqman, signing off. But before I do sign off, this is your friendly reminder to please hit that subscribe button, do leave us a like, and of course, we welcome all comments. I'll catch you in the next one. For now, me signing off. Bye-bye.